Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric Series, the Port Authority, where I take a look at some of my favorite arcade games and weigh their home console counterparts. But today we have a very special edition, and it's one of the few instances I can think of this actually happening. A few weeks ago I ran a comparison, Dead or Alive Sega Model 2 versus Sega Saturn, and people kept asking why I hadn't talked about the PlayStation arcade and home ports. That was because I was saving it for a very special video, because Dead or Alive is one of the few instances in which the game was re-released to arcades on quote-unquote inferior hardware as an upgrade. Because right now you're looking at the Model 2 introductory sequence here, the attract mode, and we're going to move over to the actual arcade board based on PlayStation 1 hardware. And while this game is definitely going to be graphically inferior in some spots, it's going to have more content and be the more fully featured version of Dead or Alive. And I really can't think of many other games that got re-released into arcades on lesser hardware. Sometimes you would get ROM upgrades on these same boards, but there's not many instances of a game being reproduced for a completely different piece of hardware. As we get into it, it is still the Dead or Alive you know, love, and remember. You get new costumes, new characters, you get new backgrounds, and you basically just get more of a good thing. The only difference is it's not running on the Sega Model 2 arcade hardware, it's running on the Capcom ZN series with a little bit of custom BIOS and firmware going on in the background for Tecmo's actual needs here. But it's a really good example of just because a game takes a graphical downgrade does not mean it's inferior to its source material, because if I had to pick one of the two of these to play, it'd be a really hard decision, but by the end of the video I'll definitely tell you what I would do. Now, it's not uncommon at all to see an arcade game get ported to home console hardware that was not the actual base of the production when it was first made. It is very rare to see it go back to the arcades on a different platform. That's exactly what Dead or Alive ++ is right here. It is based on PlayStation 1 arcade hardware, it is an enhanced version of the game, and it is running extremely well as far as I can tell right now. It's one of those things, it's such a weird comparison to make. There aren't many good examples out there that you could actually take a look at to talk about this sort of subject, but that's why I kept it to its own video. And I would say, as far as the gameplay is concerned, as far as the frame rate is concerned, the pacing and everything else, the PlayStation 1 arcade version of Dead or Alive is every bit as good and maybe slightly better than the Sega Model 2. There's something about the fluidity here that feels like it's running ever so slightly faster than the Model 2 original, and that could very well be. There was a lot more known knowledge about how to program for PlayStation 1 by the time this game came out than there was when the Model 2 existed as an arcade board, because they had already ported the game over to PlayStation. Bringing it to a PlayStation-based arcade board would not be that difficult, and pretty much PlayStation was stealing everybody else's lunch when it came to overall sales and developer support. Now, taking a look at the Model 2 version here, you're going to see that same sunset we just saw, except with a slightly different context and background. And the one thing that the Model 2 is always going to have over the PlayStation arcade version is the 3D polygons in the actual background making up some of the buildings. Here you take a look, you'll see there that pier is modeled in 3D, and pretty much everything else that isn't that skybox is going to be 3D as well. And I would say the models definitely have a few more polygons compared to PlayStation 1. When we move over and back to PlayStation 1, you're going to see that you have the floor, but every single thing is going to be a static 2D image in the background, which definitely is a little bit visual jarring compared to the Model 2 original. You can tell that everything is flat, and they're saving all of the horsepower to make these models appear on screen and running at 60 frames per second. And that definitely is a smart choice. You wouldn't want to slow down a fighting game for prettier backgrounds. You want to have it run as fast as possible. And that's what Dead or Alive ++ is doing here, and you'll see the entire quote-unquote physics system has come over whole cloth, and I would definitely say some of the costumes have been redesigned as well to give the fans of a certain aspect of Dead or Alive a little bit more to look at, pun very much intended. It's always been what the series does. You can like it, you can hate it, but we have to talk about the fact that it is here, and it has come over intact and definitely gotten amplified in some ways. If you take a look at the title screen as well, you also have tag match now, not just tournament, so you get a few different modes compared to the arcade original. So if you enjoyed Dead or Alive, you're going to get more of a good thing here. You're just going to have more gameplay, more content, more costumes, and everything else. And you'll see here you do get a costume select for every character as well. Go ahead and listen to the soundtrack. It does sound slightly different on PlayStation 1 arcade hardware, and I'll be right back. I mean, it's definitely the Dead or Alive soundtrack we all know, love, and remembered. It sounds good coming out of the PlayStation 1 arcade hardware as well. And if you're wondering why I'm not talking about the PlayStation 1 port, I just felt like making this an arcade-to-arcade comparison, because Port Authority really has no rules except the rules I decide to make for them the day that I want to make a video. And I will say, even if the models have a few less polygons compared to Model 2, they definitely come across on screen as having more character with all of the different costumes. And you'll see here the real-time lighting, kind of the shading changing on the models depending on what they're actually in light-wise. It's just working, and it's doing such a good job of it. But again, it's the fluidity and sensation of speed here on the PlayStation 1 arcade board that is the best part of DOA++. And I would definitely say, at least right now, if I had to go back and play one, I'd probably go back and play DOA++ for the added content and just the overall sense of smoothness. Because you can see here on the Model 2 footage running at its native frame rate, it doesn't feel quite as fast. Now this is just definitely a game adjustment. Model 2 is much more powerful than the PlayStation 1 arcade board that Dead or Alive++ ran on, but it comes down to game design and what they're trying to do with it. As you'll see here, Kasumi, her model, is not as pretty as far as the polygons are concerned on something like the PlayStation 1 based hardware, but she gets that classic costume you know for Dead or Alive 2, and there's just a lot of other fun going on here. And of course, they do have the tag battle as well, something you're not really going to see in the Model 2 original. So the question is, which one of these is technically the quote-unquote better game? And the answer is, it just depends on what you want out of something like Dead or Alive. If you want that classic original release, if you want the prettiest looking version of the game with the Model 2 hardware, the Model 2 lighting, and all of the 3D backgrounds that it brought over, then something like the Sega Model 2 version of the game is going to be the one you're going to want to play. Now, if you want to play the most comprehensive, fun version of Dead or Alive to play, I would probably say you want to play Dead or Alive++. It might not be the better looking game visually, but it just has more of a good thing. And when you have a game as good as Dead or Alive, having more of it is just going to be a fun time. Now, definitely, if you wanted to get either one of these arcade boards, they're not cheap, but the actual PlayStation 1 based arcade board is going to be a lot easier to find than the Model 2 original, and it's going to be a lot easier to hook up and deal with as well, because it's primarily a JAMA board versus Model 2 being its own filter board that you have to wire up into a cabinet or basically make custom conversions to JAMA for. I doubt anyone watching this video is going to run out and buy either of those arcade boards based on these videos. They just like to see which one's better. And the thing is, both are incredible, and playing them back to back, you can really get a sense of where Dead or Alive came from and where Dead or Alive was going, because ++ really leads more into what you'd see on the Dreamcast, not on Xbox with Dead or Alive 2 or Dead or Alive 3, and where the franchise was going, not just in the speed and gameplay, but also in some of the more ridiculous costumes that you would see as the franchise moved further along. Now, a stage like this definitely has big Tekken vibes, but it works, and it's an area where the 2D backgrounds actually look pretty good. It's in the open areas where I don't love them as much. But we're going to do one more soundtrack sample, 35 seconds, so you can hear the PlayStation 1 and how it renders the audio, and I'll be right back with more. Just a classic soundtrack, and again, if you want to answer the question, which is the version of Dead or Alive you should play, it really is both of them, because this is the best version of Dead or Alive++, and Dead or Alive, the best version, is on Model 2. It just depends on what release you're looking at, because this really isn't Dead or Alive as you remember it on the Sega Model 2. It is an enhanced version of the game, basically a ROM upgrade like you'd see in arcade boards, except it moved to a completely different arcade board from a Sega platform to a Sony platform in the transition. So if you want the most fully featured version of the original Dead or Alive, as far as arcades are concerned, I would play Dead or Alive++. If you want the prettiest looking version of the game and to know where it started, I would play the Sega Model 2 version of the game. But you leave me a comment down below and you tell me, Sega Model 2 or the PlayStation 1 arcade board for Dead or Alive. I'd be curious to hear your opinions. If you want to see more videos like this, leave me some recommendations down below, but we are done. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.